Have you ever wondered why some of the smartest people you know believe the dumbest things? Maybe it was a coworker who repeated a wild conspiracy, a family member who forwarded a rumor without checking, or a friend who stood by a choice that made absolutely no sense. And the strange part? No matter how clearly you explained the truth, nothing seemed to get through. It's easy to think stupidity is just about intelligence. Some people are clever, others are not. But that's not what's happening here. What we're dealing with is something much more unsettling. A kind of blindness that spreads in groups. A surrender of thought that even the most educated aren't safe from. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a philosopher and theologian who lived through the nightmare of Nazi Germany, called it the theory of stupidity. And his warning still echoes today. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. He wasn't talking about ignorance. He was talking about something deeper, a choice people make to stop thinking for themselves. And if you've ever felt frustrated, watching the world around you slide into noise, distraction, and blind agreement, this theory explains why. But before we dive deeper, I want to ask something of you. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to hear isn't just history or philosophy. It's a mirror. It will change the way you look at the people around you, and maybe even the way you see yourself. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wasn't writing from the safety of a lecture hall or a distant office. He was living in the heart of Nazi Germany, watching ordinary people, neighbors, co-workers, even respected professionals, fall into a terrifying trap. They weren't all fanatics or evil masterminds. Many were simply people who stopped questioning, stopped thinking, and started surrendering to the crowd. That's what Bonhoeffer meant when he said, "Against stupidity, we are defenseless." He didn't mean stupidity in the way we normally think of it, as a lack of intelligence. He meant something more dangerous. He meant the willful blindness that spreads when people choose comfort over responsibility, conformity over courage. Think about it. Ignorance can be fixed. If someone doesn't know something, you can teach them. But stupidity, the kind Bonhoeffer described, is different. It isn't about not knowing. It's about refusing to know. It's the decision to close your eyes when the truth feels inconvenient. And that's why it's so terrifying. Because intelligence doesn't protect you from it. You've probably seen it today. A highly educated friend who shares false information online without checking. A leader who repeats slogans instead of answers. Crowds of people agreeing with something they know, deep down, doesn't add up, just because it's easier to go along. That's not ignorance, that's surrender. Bonhoeffer saw this surrender firsthand. In Nazi Germany, countless citizens went along with horrors they should have resisted. Not because they were all evil, but because thinking for themselves was too costly, too risky, too exhausting. And while the world is different today, the same pattern plays out in new forms. In viral misinformation, in blind loyalty to influencers or politicians, in the echo chambers of social media where questioning makes you an outcast. The terrifying part of Bonhoeffer's theory is this: stupidity spreads like an infection. One person gives up thinking, then another, then a group, until suddenly it feels like the whole world has gone mad. And when that happens, even the smartest individuals can be swept along, because the crowd drowns out their doubts. But here's what makes his insight powerful. If stupidity is a choice, then awareness is the antidote. The fact that you're here, listening, means you've already resisted that pull. You've felt that nagging voice inside, the one that says, something about this doesn't feel right. That instinct is the very thing Bonhoeffer believed could keep people free. And I want you to stay with me, because this isn't just history, it's your life, right now. The conversations you have at work, the posts you scroll past online, the choices you make in silence when no one else is watching. Bonhoeffer's warning wasn't for some distant world, it was for us, for today, for you. By the time we reach the end of this video, you'll understand not just what stupidity looks like, but why it takes hold of entire societies and how you can resist it. Because the terrifying truth is this: it only wins if we stop thinking. One of the most unsettling parts of Bonhoeffer's theory is this: intelligence doesn't protect you from stupidity. You can have degrees on your wall, years of experience, even a sharp mind, and still fall victim to the collective blindness that sweeps through society. Because stupidity, as Bonhoeffer saw it, isn't about what you know. It's about whether you're willing to think for yourself when it matters most. Take a moment to think about the smartest person you know. Maybe they can solve complex problems, recall facts in an instant, or excel at their career. But have you ever noticed how quickly even smart people can fall silent when their beliefs are challenged? How they sometimes choose the comfort of fitting in over the discomfort of standing apart? That's the trap. Bonhoeffer believed that people surrender their ability to think when the pressure of the group becomes too strong. It's not that they don't know better, it's that they don't want to risk being the odd one out. And if you've ever bitten your tongue in a meeting or stayed quiet in a family argument just to keep the peace, you know how powerful that pressure can be. This is how stupidity spreads, not because people are incapable of thinking, but because they're unwilling to pay the price of thinking. And that price can be isolation, ridicule, even anger from the people you care about most. Look around today. How often do we see highly intelligent people repeating slogans, sharing unverified stories, or defending actions they know are wrong, simply because it's easier than facing the consequences of speaking up? It happens online, in politics, in workplaces, even in families. And it proves Bonhoeffer's point. Intelligence without courage is defenseless. And maybe as you hear this, you're remembering a moment when you stayed silent. A moment when you felt something was wrong, but you didn't say it. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. We've all been there, but Bonhoeffer's reminder is this: every time we stay silent, we help stupidity grow stronger. Every time we speak, even if our voice shakes, we push back against it. That's why I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever seen this in your own life? A moment when someone you respected surrendered to the crowd, or when you felt the pressure to do the same? Share it in the comments below. Not just for me, but for the people who will scroll down later, feeling the same weight of silence. Your story could be the one that helps them realize they're not alone. Because the truth is, the fight against stupidity isn't won in speeches or debates. It's won in those quiet, uncomfortable moments when one person dares to think for themselves. And that person can be you. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll explore how collective stupidity doesn't just affect individuals. It shapes entire cultures, sometimes with devastating consequences. It's one thing when a single person stops thinking. It's frustrating, even painful, but it's still manageable. The danger comes when this blindness stops being individual and becomes collective. That's when it spreads like wildfire and starts shaping entire cultures. And that's what Bonhoeffer feared most, not the foolishness of a few, but the surrender of the many. Think about how crowds behave. Alone, a person might hesitate, reflect, even question. But in a crowd, reflection fades. People chant slogans they don't fully understand, laugh at jokes they don't really find funny, or agree to decisions they know feel wrong. Why? Because in a group, belonging feels safer than truth. You've probably felt it yourself. Sitting in a meeting at work, everyone nodding along to a bad idea. You know it doesn't make sense, but you keep quiet because no one else is speaking up. Or maybe on social media, you see a post spreading like wildfire, angry, emotional, catchy, but you hesitate to question it because you don't want to be attacked in the comments. That hesitation, multiplied by millions, is how collective stupidity grows. Bonhoeffer saw this firsthand in Nazi Germany. Ordinary citizens who might have questioned things on their own became swept up in crowds where silence and agreement felt safer than resistance. And though today's world looks different, the dynamic hasn't gone away. It shows up in political rallies, in online mobs, even in everyday workplaces and families. Once stupidity becomes collective, it develops a life of its own, bigger than any single individual. And here's the terrifying part. Once a culture embraces stupidity, truth doesn't just get ignored, it gets mocked. People who raise questions are labeled difficult, negative, or even dangerous. You've probably seen this online. Someone calmly pointing out facts, only to be drowned in ridicule, while the loudest voices cheer each other on. That's why Bonhoeffer said stupidity is more dangerous than malice. Malice can be confronted, argued with, resisted, but stupidity, once it becomes collective, doesn't even recognize it needs correction. It feels righteous, untouchable, even proud of itself. Maybe you felt that frustration, watching a conversation spiral where no amount of reason can break through. It's like shouting into the wind. And that's exactly why collective stupidity is so destructive. Once enough people surrender their thinking, the culture itself begins to punish those who still dare to think. But here's where awareness matters. The fact that you've noticed this pattern, at work, online, in your community, means you're already standing outside of it. You're already resisting, even in small ways. And every small act of awareness matters, because collective stupidity only thrives when individuals give in. Stay with me, because next we'll talk about something even more unsettling: how leaders and systems exploit this collective blindness, turning it into a tool for control. Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity doesn't just happen on its own. It's not random. It's often cultivated, fed by leaders, systems, and institutions that benefit when people stop thinking critically. Because a crowd that has surrendered its judgment is far easier to control than a crowd that asks questions. Think about your daily life. How many times have you felt like decisions were made for you, not with you? At work, maybe policies are handed down from above that make no sense, but no one challenges them because that's just the way it is. In politics, slogans replace real solutions, and people cheer for them because it feels safer than digging into messy truths. Even in family life, sometimes the loudest voice becomes the truth, and everyone else goes along just to keep the peace. These patterns don't happen by accident. They happen because power thrives in environments where questioning is rare. A leader doesn't have to convince everyone of their brilliance. They just have to discourage people from thinking too much. And when stupidity becomes collective, leaders don't even need to silence dissent directly. The group will do it for them. They'll mock the questioners, shame the doubters, and reward blind loyalty. You've probably seen this play out online. A popular influencer or public figure makes a statement. Maybe it's shallow, maybe it's misleading. But instead of asking questions, thousands of comments pour in with praise, and anyone who raises a concern is instantly attacked. That's not reasoned debate. That's collective blindness protecting itself. Bonhoeffer saw this clearly in Nazi Germany, but his warning stretches into every generation. He argued that stupidity isn't just a personal flaw, it's a social condition, one that leaders exploit to strengthen their grip. Because when people surrender their thinking, they also surrender their freedom. And when freedom is gone, even truth feels powerless. And maybe this is where it becomes most relatable. You don't have to live under a dictator to feel this. You might feel it in your workplace when you swallow your words because it's not worth the fight. You might feel it in your community when you see people accept something harmful because it's easier than making waves. You might even feel it at your own dinner table, when staying silent feels safer than challenging the story everyone else agrees on. The cost of this silence is heavy, because every time we trade truth for comfort, someone else gains control. And over time, those small surrenders add up, until an entire culture begins to confuse compliance with wisdom. But here's the good news. Awareness changes the equation. The moment you start noticing these patterns, at work, online, in your family, you weaken their power. Because once you see how stupidity is exploited, you can't unsee it. And that's why I want you to keep going with me. Because in the next part, we'll explore the personal cost of living in a world shaped by collective stupidity and how it quietly reshapes who we are when we stop resisting. It's easy to talk about stupidity as an abstract idea, something that exists out there in politics, in history, in society. But Bonhoeffer's insight cuts deeper, because stupidity doesn't just shape the world around us, it shapes the world inside us. The more we live in environments where questioning is punished and blind agreement is rewarded, the more it quietly reshapes who we are. Think about the weight of silence. Have you ever walked away from a conversation knowing you should have spoken up but didn't? At first it feels small. You tell yourself, it wasn't worth the argument. But over time, those silences add up. They create a kind of heaviness inside, a sense that your voice doesn't matter, or worse, that maybe you don't even trust it anymore. That's the personal cost of collective stupidity. It steals not just truth, but also courage. It convinces you that peace comes from keeping your head down, when really, it only deepens the emptiness. And the scariest part, the longer you live in that environment, the more normal it begins to feel. You stop noticing how much of yourself you've set aside just to belong. Maybe you felt this at work, watching decisions you disagree with but biting your tongue to stay professional. Maybe you felt it in your family, when you let a false story stand because you don't want to upset anyone. Or maybe you felt it online, scrolling through comment sections where reason is drowned out, and you think, what's the point of even trying? The truth is, the cost of this surrender is isolation, because when you stop speaking, you start to feel alone, even in a crowded room. You start to wonder if anyone else sees what you see, if anyone else feels the same unease. That loneliness is exactly what Bonhoeffer was warning about. The slow erosion of our inner strength until stupidity doesn't just surround us, it seeps into us. But here's something worth holding on to. If you've ever felt that loneliness, you're not alone. In fact, that feeling is proof that you're awake. It means your mind is still alive, still restless, still searching for something real. Bonhoeffer believed that awareness itself was resistance, that the simple act of noticing the trap meant you hadn't fallen fully into it. And I want you to remember this. Your voice still matters, even when it shakes, even when no one claps. Because every time you speak a little truth in a world addicted to lies, you remind someone else that they're not alone either. And that spark of connection is how change begins. Quiet, small, but unstoppable. Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll uncover what Bonhoeffer believed was the only way forward. The path to resisting stupidity without becoming consumed by it yourself. Bonhoeffer understood something crucial. You can't argue stupidity out of existence. Logic won't pierce it, facts won't dismantle it, and shouting only makes it dig in deeper. So how do you resist something so stubborn, so deeply rooted in human behavior? His answer was both sobering and liberating. You resist by refusing to join it. That means choosing thoughtfulness when the crowd chooses noise, choosing honesty when lies feel easier, choosing courage when silence seems safer. Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity can only be countered through example, by living in a way that refuses to surrender your mind, even when everyone else has. And maybe that feels small. Maybe you're thinking, what difference does it make if I stay thoughtful, if the whole world is blind? But remember this, stupidity thrives in numbers. It feeds on agreement, on conformity, on the illusion that everyone thinks this way. The moment one person dares to break that illusion, it cracks, and every crack matters. Think about it. How many times has one person's courage inspired you? Maybe it was a friend who spoke up when no one else did. Maybe it was a stranger online who said what you were too afraid to say. Those moments stick with us because they remind us that truth still has a pulse. And here's where it becomes personal. Your refusal to surrender, even in small ways, gives permission for others to do the same. Your voice can spark someone else's. Your choice to think for yourself can ripple further than you realize. So, resisting stupidity isn't about winning arguments. It's about keeping your integrity intact. It's about standing in a storm without losing yourself. That's the quiet revolution Bonhoeffer pointed toward. Not dramatic, not flashy, but powerful enough to outlast the noise. And that's why I want you to stay with me for the final part, because it's here that Bonhoeffer's warning transforms into something more than a theory. It becomes a call to live differently. Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity isn't just a clever idea. It was born in the darkest hours of his life, when he watched a nation surrender its conscience to conformity. And his warning is chillingly clear. The greatest danger to humanity isn't always evil men plotting in the shadows. It's ordinary people who stop thinking, stop questioning, and start blindly following. But here's the truth you can't ignore. You and I are not powerless in the face of this, because every time you refuse to let the crowd think for you, you're breaking the cycle. Every time you ask a hard question when silence feels easier, you're resisting. Every time you choose to live awake, even when the world prefers sleep, you're keeping wisdom alive. And yes, it costs something. Courage always does. You might lose approval. You might face criticism. You might even feel alone. But that's the paradox Bonhoeffer understood. Real strength is born in those very moments of discomfort. Because while stupidity spreads through conformity, freedom spreads through courage. So let me ask you, where in your life have you stayed silent when you wanted to speak? Where have you gone along with something you knew wasn't right just to avoid standing out? These aren't small moments. They're the battleground where truth either lives or dies. And maybe you feel the weight of that right now. Maybe you've been carrying that frustration, wondering if it even matters. Let this be your reminder. It does matter. Your refusal to surrender matters. Your voice, even when it shakes, matters. Because every act of awareness, every spark of honesty, every decision to stay awake pushes back against the tide of blindness. That's the heart of Bonhoeffer's warning and his hope. Yes, stupidity is dangerous, but it is not invincible. Awareness is the first crack. Courage is the second. And when enough cracks appear, the wall begins to fall. So as you leave this video, take this with you. The fight against stupidity doesn't happen somewhere far away. It happens right here, in your daily choices, in your conversations, in your courage to see clearly when others look away. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed this kind of blindness at work, online, even in your own family? Share your story in the comments, because the more we speak, the more we remind each other that we're not alone. And if this message resonates with you, consider subscribing. Not because it's just another button to press, but because together we're building a space where awareness matters, where thought still has value, and where wisdom isn't forgotten.